Give me the podcast, I beg of you! Because we are talking about the original Child's Play. What's going on? Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we talk all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I'm the guest, Jack. I'm kind of startled by that intro, man. I was expecting like a professional welcome to Abyss Gazing, and I was just like, yeah! I was like, oh my god, that's the kind of energy we're bringing. That I'm gonna need more caffeine.
Yeah. So I'm Josh. I'm the other co-host. No, it started with on our last episode. We did Texas Chainsaw, and we were trying to find out what do you call what's the Freddy Krueger, Fred Head's equivalent of like people that like Leatherface. And so we came up with our guest came up with Leather Fam. And so I started out that episode. I was like, what's up, Leather Fam? And so I tried to like what's a cool thing that I could say tonight that is also, references somehow back to Chucky. And of course it's the through line through the entire Andy-Barclay trilogy.
Yep.
Give me the power, I beg of you.
Yeah, it was good.
I just figured it was over caffeinated.
Oh no, not at all. So we are talking about the original Child's Play tonight, and this opens up a multiverse within the Victims and Villains content, because I didn't know this until last night. We covered the original Child's Play and the remake in a crossover event with our friends over at Franchise Fatigue. But this episode is going to be dissecting all the original ones and talking about the hotly anticipated upcoming Chucky series, which you guys can follow my episode by episode thoughts on Twitter at Victims and Villains as it's coming out, as it's premiering live. But Mike, our guest, aka Jagger VHS, comes to us via our friends over at the Box Network. They've done a couple streams with us before. Mike has been on the show for last year for Nightmare on Elm Street. What is going on tonight, man?
Not much. I'm kind of still reeling from a couple films I watched earlier. I finally, from the episode you did with us over on Cursed Tapes, I finally got Shudder. So I've been catching up on a lot of movies I've been missing.
I love that channel.
It's so great.
It's the best streaming service ever.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like earlier, we watched Hellbound Hellraiser 2 because my wife had seen the first one, but not the second one. And then we watched Satanic Panic.
I still need to see
that was
one.
fun.
It was a fun ride. It was a little odd. The first, I was like, this is going to be one of those bad movies that I make fun of, but it's not. By the end of it, I'm just like, oh, wow.
Look up Veronica. That's going to be one of those bad movies you will make
That's
fun
the one
of.
that's in Spanish, right?
No, that's the one that's by Glenn Danzig.
Oh.
Yeah. We were not fans of that here at Victims.
Okay.
Veronica.
Veronica. I thought you were talking about Veronica, the one on Netflix, because I've seen that one.
No, Veronica I reviewed for Shudder, and the dude wrote it. And Josh emailed him and told him, yeah, Mark didn't have much good to say about it. And his response was, after reading it, that could be a great review.
Oh, wow. I'll have to add that to my list of things to watch.
I feel like it was an excuse for Glenn Danzig to just tape scenes with random strippers and porn stars.
I mean, possibly, but no joke. After we got done recording Cursed Tapes a couple weeks ago, which just... go follow the Box Network here on Twitch. I ended up probably for like a half hour after we got done recording, just telling Mike why he needs to specifically just invest into Shudder. Shudder's like the best $6 you can spend a month if you are a horror fan.
Oh, I went ahead and just paid for the year. I'm not going to lie to you.
Nice.
I think they give you a discount for that.
They did.
Don't they?
They did. I looked at it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to use it. So I might as well. I know once I take the plunge, I'm just going to watch everything. And like in my first week, I rewatched all the classics. I watched all the Halloween movies that are on there. I watched Hellraiser. I watched In Search of Darkness, which then made me want to rewatch Reanimator. I finally rewatched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre again, and I finally see the appreciation for the film. Took me how many years to admit that one? But yeah, Shudder's been amazing.
Yeah, it's like the first one that gets turned on in my house when we sit down. It's like, what do you want to watch? I don't know. What do you want to watch? Shudder.
What haven't we seen on Shudder?
Yeah.
Because it's everything. It's old classics to cheesy B movies, foreign, modern. If it's horror, it's probably on there in some aspect.
Yeah, I think next on my list to watch is Audition.
Nice.
Oh,
It's one I haven't seen all the way through yet. I saw like the beginning of it, and then I had to leave.
I haven't seen it. I've heard it's up there with what is it, Martyrs and stuff like that. Pretty brutal, graphic horror.
Heard good things about it though.
If you're looking for something a little bit lighter, one thing that I always tell people to check out, it's one of the best films that Shudder has produced this year, and it's Psycho Gorman.
Oh, yes.
It's a wild ride.
It is fantastic. It is dumb in a fun way.
I showed one of we did a convention not that long ago, and we were looking for a movie to watch afterwards, and I was like, what do you want to watch? And he's like, I want to watch something new. It's got to be something horror, and it's got to be something comedic if you have it. And I was like, got you. And that was the one we ended up watching. And he was like, this is amazing. I've not heard anyone say anything bad about it in any time that I've ever actually told them to watch it, and they've actually gone through and watched it. So, Mike, add it to your long list.
I'm actually adding it as we're talking about it. Because for some reason, Shudder is still up on my computer. I don't know why I'm saying for some reason. Yeah, for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into talking about Child's Play tonight, man, tell us a little bit about the Box Network, because since you've last been on the show, a lot has changed with your streaming habits.
Yeah, I realized the other day, I got the memory. It's like just a little over exactly a year since I was on the Nightmare on Elm Street episode when we first did our first thing together. And since then, I've gone from being, I think at the time I was only a Dead by Daylight streamer. So that's all I played was Dead by Daylight and League of Legends. Now I don't even stream games anymore. I've moved strictly to just running this podcast network. We do all live shows. Tuesdays we do Comic Relief, which is our comics and live adaptations podcast show. Wednesdays is Otaku's Anonymous, our anime and manga episode. And then Thursdays is Cursed Tapes, the horror show run by me. We also have a music show, which is called Jam Sessions, which happens occasionally, covering new music, what's going on in the music industry, news, gossip, whatever. We have a new show called The Void, which is everything else that we don't cover on the shows. That's debuting in November. And then we have a potential film, like a cinematography show coming up. So a lot's been going on with the Box Network. We've been steadily expanding and growing and trying to put out new content. We're branching into YouTube content and TikTok as well to try and kind of get the info and everything out to the masses.
Oh, I need to, when we get out of here, we'll exchange TikTok information. We'll do a follow for a follow.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because, like, as a cinephile, I've listened to a lot of movie podcasts, and obviously there's not one that is being done specifically for like a cinematography standpoint. Mm-hmm. How did something like that kind of like even get brought up into the conversation?
Well, actually it was, it's funny enough, it was kind of a rant between me, my wife, and my roommate. My roommate's a film major, and he's worked on a couple of films before, and he was talking about wanting to do content creation, and me and my wife were kind of ranting about like me being so busy with planning podcast stuff and having so many shows to do. She was like, you need to put up more shows that are just like not run by you and not planned by you. And my roommate came out and she's like, hey, you want to do a film podcast? And he's like, sure. And then I kind of just started planning it in my head. I'm like, we could do it to where it's not like stuck in a genre or like just comic books and things like that. It's very like broad, kind of dissecting it as like a film critic would from a cinematography standpoint. So it hasn't fully taken shape yet, but we're developing it as we go.
So kind of obviously this is a horror podcast, and so we want to plug other horror podcasts. Tell us a little bit about Cursed Tapes.
Cursed Tapes. It's kind of been my love child baby for quite a few years. I've been making plans for a sort of horror show. Horror's been a part of my life, as you can see from my room. It's kind of just a lifestyle, like most horror fans know. And I've been wanting to do a show dedicated to just talking about horror films and like the little things that I know, because every time I sit down and watch a movie with somebody and I'm like, oh yeah, did you know this about this movie? Like, Lord help you if you sit down and watch The Exorcist with me or Poltergeist, because I won't stop talking through the entire thing. And then I had a friend who was just like, you should just start a show. Like, it just should just be you in front of a camera. You pick a movie, you talk about it for an hour, boom, show. I'm like, I could do that. And shortly after I started making plans to do that show by myself, my friend Xander approached me about doing a comic book show with him, because we were sitting there talking about WandaVision earlier this year. It actually just started this year. We were sitting there talking and dissecting WandaVision. He's like, hey, do you want to do a podcast together? I was like, sure, why not? And we did that for a couple weeks, and then it slowly evolved into, hey, we should do other shows. Because like he wanted to talk about music, I wanted to talk about horror. I was like, why don't we just make a podcast network? And then the box was made.
Yeah. So what I appreciate about you is that it's not just that concept of we're going to talk about one movie and that's going to be it. Because when I got invited back in the spring when we were planning the fall schedule, you had mentioned something about like, hey, do you want to come into podcast with me? And I was like, yeah, dude, absolutely. Like, what do you want to talk? Like, what movie you want to talk about? Because that's generally like, if I get asked to come on and do another podcast, we're going to talk about this one singular film. And the Box Network is really interesting because you guys aren't just specifically talking about one particular manga series or comic series or even a horror movie. It's very much like we're gonna dive into these subgenres and kind of see how everything intertwines itself. Yeah, that was one thing that we decided straight out the gate. We didn't want to like pigeonhole ourselves into like section content, which we kind of did with Comic Relief. We were doing like a live catch-up show for all the shows like on Disney Plus. Like we did a weekly recap of WandaVision, and we did the same thing with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And then I kind of brought up the idea when I started doing Cursed Tapes. I was like, hey, why don't we just start doing topics like this? And Otakus Anonymous was doing the same thing. They were doing things like if the villain's so bad, why is he sexy? Kind of deal. The problem with remakes, stuff like that. So it's like you could talk about a bunch of different things. It becomes more of a dialogue and less of an informative show. So it's like you can I was kind of trying to think of like the stuff I like to listen to where it's people having a conversation and you can kind of see yourself in that conversation. And I wanted to do that for our audience. I wanted our audience to feel like they were connected with the conversation we were having. I absolutely love that because it opens up that gate of like how many more people you guys can get to actually listen to the show. That's why when we started doing Victims and Villains, we started doing it in that very same way as we're going to start just doing multiple different things. And then eventually the Nicolas Cage podcast came, Abyss Gazing came. And, even now, like we still have variety show and stuff like that. But where can people find the Box Network online? The Box Network is primarily on Twitch. It's _Box Network on Twitch. We are live Tuesdays at 9, Wednesdays at 9, and Thursdays at 8. And then currently we are doing our Halloween takeover, Cursed Tapes takeover month, where every Friday we're watching a movie in our Discord and also doing a live talk panel on Twitch. So you can follow us on Twitch. You can get the link to the Discord. You can watch the movie with us, join in the discussion about the movie. We're doing like a live reaction panel because we had an issue on our first week. We watched Lords of Salem through Amazon Prime and we got a content notice because of the film. Was it the
haven't
priests?
It was the priests.
I haven't
it
seen
seemed-
Lords of Salem yet. That's like one of the only zombie movies I haven't seen.
It's definitely his more out there. It was definitely his like, I want to break away from the House of a Thousand Corpses mold and be like, it's art. This is art. That's what he
Look,
did.
It is
Well,
his magnum opus.
House of a Thousand Corpses, he may have done 2 more movies in the series, but none of his movies are like House of a Thousand Corpses since.
No. It was such a different idea when it came out.
Yeah.
That trilogy just gets progressively worse, in my
Well,
opinion.
yeah, most trilogies do. I mean, there are very few that have rises and falls.
Facts.
And I think it all depends on who you talk to. If you ask my brother, he absolutely loved House of a Thousand Corpses and
I
thinks
love it.
each one is better every time they come out. Yeah.
No, I actually just recently bought Lords of Salem on Blu-ray.
Mm.
I got the lenticular cover to it, so it's like looks really nice.
Oh yeah.
I'm waiting on my new movie to show up tomorrow, and I'm super happy about it. So it was a standout at one of the festivals we covered, the 24-hour found footage festival.
Oh, unnamed film festival,
Yes.
which still to this day gets brought up every now and then. It's the one festival we still keep talking about. But
Cauldron Films released 1974. What is it? Possession de Altair, I think was the name of it.
Mhm.
They did a limited release here within the last month. 1974, Les Possession de Altair is the name of it. It's a found footage, and it was fantastic. I wasn't expecting much, and I absolutely loved it. So I found out Cauldron Films had released like 1,600 copies. So I got one to set next to my Midsummer director's cut.
so here's
Nice.
what we need to do, Mark. Is we need to have a day where the two of us just get together. I'll show you Lords of Salem. You show me 1970. Is it 1974?
1974, yeah.
Yeah, we'll just bond over these things.
Prep yourself mentally for Lords of Salem, because I was not ready when we showed it, because I hadn't seen it before. I was like, I want to watch this. I wanted to do movies that I either hadn't seen before or hadn't seen in a long time since I started doing the show, because me and Captain were talking about it on my show, how having a show and having a podcast makes you see movies in a different light. Like
Yes.
a year ago,
It does.
a year
does.
ago, the Conjuring franchise was my favorite set of movies. Now, I don't think they're good. I think they're garbage. Like, after dissecting them and talking about them for like 2 or 3 episodes, I don't like them. I can't watch them anymore.
I still really enjoy them as an entertainment aspect.
I enjoyed the first one. I'll say that much.
The first one is the only one I actually own.
The first one was the best.
Yes.
But I'm
And
also
the second Annabelle was excellent. Annabelle Creation.
That one was
really
pretty good. I will give it that. But every other one is kind of just very middle of the road for me. And I'm just kind of like, why did I praise this franchise so much? I don't understand it.
also, I mean, I still like that franchise, but yeah. Anyways, going back to a comment that you also said, Jagger, is the trilogy is getting progressively worse as they go on, and I think Child's Play would suffer from that.
I don't think it does.
I know it kind of goes downhill a little bit, but then it picks right back up and gets better when they bring in Jennifer Tilly.
That was kind of my segue. I was like, most franchises
I was
either
just
have
trying
that,
to make a good segue back into the movie.
I was setting you up for it, and that was going to be my point. Most trilogies or like franchises have that like big downfall. Very few, aside from like a couple of the classics, have those like big rises and falls. And I think Child's Play is one that has those rises and falls, because like if Child's Play 1 starts up here, by the time you're at Child's Play 3, you're kind of like down here, and then you get Bride of Chucky to bring it back up.
Yep.
Seed of Chucky brings it back down, and then Curse and Cult bring it back up again. And now the hype for it is way up there because of the TV show. I mean, they're taking a classic slasher franchise, bringing it to TV, and keeping it in continuity. That's huge.
And I kind of feel like the remake did the same thing as the Poltergeist remake, and just nobody even remembers it. Like
We
there
don't
was
need
a
to talk about that.
I'll say this much. I like the Child's Play remake for what it was. Looking at it as not a Child's Play film. Looking at it for like what oh god, the name's escaping me now.
It sounds like you
Dan
look
Mancini? The original creator?
Don Mancini.
Don Mancini. He stayed. I was reading something earlier today that he was saying that he wanted to do what the remake did originally. He didn't want to include the voodoo ritual stuff. That got added in like the screenwriting phase, and I kind of feel like the remake did what they couldn't do because of screenwriter problems back in the day, but it's newer and it's being compared to such a classic franchise. You kind of just can't compare it. It's never going to hold up to such a iconic franchise.
Yeah. I think for me, like, I was talking before we started talking about this. Mark had to quickly run out real quick before we started recording, and I'd mentioned that like I've been just like devouring this franchise. Like, this is a franchise that I truly do enjoy. I think that to your point, Jagger, like it starts off like, you know, first one's really excellent. Second one kind of keeps on par with the quality. Third one is kind of like the Halloween 5 of that franchise. It's just it's really boring and it's really tropish. But then you get into like Bride and it brings it back up. Seed, I'm kind of like it's on with Child's Play 2 for me, which is a controversial decision to have. But then Curse and Cult, you know, I think really elevate it and bring it back up. And then obviously, you know, we're one day out from recording this the day before the series is set to premiere, and I am like at an all-time high excitement. Like this week, not only am I getting that, getting Halloween Kills, and I'm getting I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like, it's a good time to be a horror fan.
Yes, especially this month. I mean, they kind of stacked the releases for this month.
So good.
Yeah, I know the Chucky series was coming out. I didn't know much about it, but you said it's supposed to be in continuity with the movies?
Yeah,
yes, it's supposed to pick up after. Which one was the second one? Curse or Cult? Cult.
So it's a direct sequel to Cult.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's got brad-dourif, Jennifer Tilly, like all those, everything that's happened in the Child's Play franchise is still in continuity in the show, which is so why I'm really excited for it. It's not like a spin-off or like a new story or anything like that.
Because when I first saw it, I thought it was just going to be like, oh, we're going to change the story and redo it as a TV series like they're doing with so many other things.
No, this one is a direct tie-in to that.
See, I was scared they were when they announced the Chucky TV series with like no details, no casting, nothing. I thought they were going to do the same thing that MTV did with Scream, and I was very, very upset about it. I'm like, oh, they're going to butcher another classic.
I have joked the Scream TV series ever since I saw Blowjob Mask.
You mean Blowface?
Yeah, Blowface.
The Blowface killer.
Yeah. I couldn't take it seriously.
I couldn't either.
I'm the man of I'll say the man of controversy right now because I liked Lords of Salem, and I will also stand by the Scream TV series, at least the first season of that series. The second season,
I never said I don't like Lords of Salem. It just it got me in hot water and it took me by surprise. So
well, all right, let's get into talking about Child's Play 1988. We're gonna throw a spoiler warning out here. As of this recording, there are no platforms that you can legitimately stream this on without paying for it. Mark and I both invested into. Well, I invested into physical copies. Mark rented it. But this film basically tells the story of young Andy Barclay, who gets a good guy doll, and the good guy doll is possessed by the Lakeshore Strangler, aka Charles Lee Ray, and basically the entire film is him trying to get out of to reverse the voodoo curse that put him in the doll to get back into a human. And my first question for you gentlemen is, what is the one toy that you always wanted growing up? What was your good guy doll?
So I got you on this one. So I'm the old fart of the bunch. Chucky was based on a doll called the My Buddy doll in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It was super popular. I still own one from when I was a kid.
Ooh.
Do you actually have it?
Yes.
Like, is it
it's
in your
my
home?
Parents. It's at my
your
parents. Yeah.
Okay. I want pictures of this.
Yeah, I've got a My Buddy. It was like the only present I got that birthday because they were expensive. But yeah, I have one.
Yeah,
Still.
mine is like any 90s obsessed young boy. I was the Megazord kid. I wanted the deluxe die-cast metal would hurt you if you dropped it Megazord. And I had I think I had every Megazord from like the first 6 series of Power Rangers. So I was obsessed with them. And it was like the one thing I asked for every year because like a new one would come out every Christmas. I'm like, I want that. That's what I want.
Yeah, I grew up in the age of G.I. Joe and Transformer and stuff like that. When the Transformers were made of steel and you didn't dare drop it on your toe because it might break it.
I was at the very tail end of that era because I still have it's my mom's attic. I have the original like fire truck Optimus Prime that was full metal, and if you didn't follow the instructions exactly right, it looked deformed, like he got into a flaming car wreck. Good times.
Yeah.
All right. So I actually have a visual aid to show mine off.
You and your visual aids.
It's a video podcast, bro.
He's probably got a mask or something.
Or he has like an actual good guy doll or something.
So Batman was my big thing growing up that I wanted.
Batman.
And
did you get Val Kilmer nipple Batman?
I got the next best thing, and I'm actually gonna go wide for this one so that you guys can see. So back in the day, there was a toy store, or there was a what are they called? Retail stores that were all Warner Brothers themed. So Looney Tunes, DC Comics. It was such a great thing. And they just had a ton of Batman and Robin stuff the year that this came out. And this is a bank that I no longer use, but it still sits in my office, and it still works actually. So I'm actually gonna put it up. No.
I breathe. Vengeance isn't power, but to give life. That's true power. Hey, breathe. The heat is on.
Oh my gosh.
It doesn't actually blow anymore.
That movie was so bad.
I love that movie.
Oh, that movie is terrible.
It's horrible, but I love it.
So some of the lines that Schwarzenegger did when he was like dying in the movie, they actually taped with him in a hospital bed after some sort of major procedure he had. Mm-hmm. That's why he sounded so raggedy when he was dying, is because they recorded him in the hospital after a major procedure.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into talking about the Child's Play. So we all have that one toy that we all wanted, and I feel like that adds a layer of like relatability to this, because sometimes you can like forget what it's like to be a kid as you grow old. But I feel like to that extent, having that connectivity to Andy allows him to kind of almost feel like a timeless character.
Yeah, being able to connect to like it sounds weird when you say it, but like the victim character, it makes the movie feel a little bit more immersive. So like, I get what you're saying, because like you can connect to like his idea of like wanting this toy so bad, but now it's like trying to kill you. Like, could you imagine if like me playing with a Megazord and all of a sudden it's trying to stab me in the chest? Like, I'd be mortified. I'd never watch Power Rangers again. It'd be horrible.
Yeah, as a kid, it's a whole different thing. You want this toy, you finally get it, and then in some ways it almost can end up being a letdown
Mhm.
And at some point, when he's like playing with Chucky in the beginning, after he finally gets him, he almost seems like, oh, it's not really doing anything. Like he's a little and yes, that's my giant puppy in the screen.
Hmm.
He doesn't know how to stay off camera when he's in the house. But yeah, he seems like he's a little disappointed with it. And I think that happens a lot with kids. They get all excited about a new toy. Oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And then they get it and it's not all it's hyped up to be.
Yeah, that's why. That's one of the reasons I quit playing video games, was because like you would get it, and I'd get to like a certain point in the game that I couldn't maneuver past, and then I would just get bored and walk away from it and just want nothing to do with it. And
So it's more that you weren't good at the video game than anything else.
yes, that's why I switched over to movies, man, and comic books, because like I didn't need to like think. I could just turn my brain off, and yet if I
can't
wanted
lose
to
in a
study,
movie.
exactly. If I
Oh,
wanted
you
to
could
study
still
anything
lose.
past.
Well, okay. Not as bad as in a video game.
Not me. I mean, dude, the characters might lose, but not me.
I don't know. I've seen some pretty bad movies. So
This is the point in the show where you would quote the rules from Scream about how you survive a horror movie.
Just don't do what the main character does.
You'll be fine.
don't ever get laid.
Damn.
I wouldn't survive. Is anyone? I didn't pick up on this until like today when I was watching Child's Play 3. But Charles Lee Ray is nicknamed the Lakeshore Strangler, and yet he never strangles anyone throughout this entire movie.
Well, how do you strangle somebody with tiny, tiny hands?
He did it in part 3. That's what I'm saying.
He tried to do it in part 1. He tried to strangle the mom. When
And
she opens the backup and the batteries aren't there, he spins around and he starts screaming. He's trying to strangle her, but then he realizes he's got tiny Burger King hands.
Yeah, and he goes
Can't
after
strangle with them.
he goes after the cop in the backseat of the car.
Yeah,
He
that
gets him
too.
with like a battery cable or something.
So he tries, but his hands aren't big enough. I mean, if you remember the opening sequence of Child's Play, look at brad-dourif's hands. They're big. Like, he got big hands.
I mean, I've never looked at Brad-Dourif and just been like, dang, those hands are just like lobster claws. Like,
It's like he's got like a bundle of bananas on his on his wrist.
Talk about sausage fingers.
Yeah, for real. Like, no wonder he's a strangler. Like,
Has he
come on.
Has he been as an actor in anything other than like horror movies or weirdo roles?
Lord of the Rings, bro.
Yeah, he was in Lord of the Rings.
But he was a weirdo.
You said a weird movie. You didn't say a weirdo.
I said in horror or weirdo roles.
I mean, he was Billy Bibbit in One Floor of the Cuckoo's Nest, so not terribly weird.
He's got that, I guess, that appeal to oddball, strange.
I mean,
roles
also
and
like,
characters.
he also has spent a good amount of time doing like stage productions too. Like he's done Shakespeare, so he's classically trained as well.
He's also done a lot of TV spots too.
Yeah. And I know that I get a lot of crap for this, but like Halloween 2, like this second Rob Zombie movie, like if you watch the director's cut, like his arc after Annie dies is just, you get to see a lot of those acting chops that I don't think you get to see in a lot of his other roles. I mean, I would definitely say Lord of the Rings is definitely a good argument for kind of seeing that classic training, but for the large portion of it, you don't really get to see a lot of that stuff.
So he really is more of an actor than someone like me remembers. Because I just remember him from like horror roles.
Oh,
like
he has
Halloweens and various horror parts he was in.
Yeah, he is quite a lot of. Go ahead, Mike.
He used to do a lot of like small stuff. I'm looking at his IMDb page now. Like he was a guest spot on Star Trek Voyager. He was in Night Watch, Alien Resurrection.
Resurrection.
Yeah, I mean, not the greatest film, but still.
That's one of those movies if it hadn't been an Aliens movie, it would have been a good Alien movie.
Facts.
Yeah, it killed it to be part of the Alien franchise.
He also did a good bit of voice acting too. Like he was in
I could see that.
where I just saw it. It was the movie Gun, which is the prequel to Red Dead Redemption. He was Reverend Reed, and I remember that game. That game was phenomenal. So he's done a couple voice acting roles. He's done a lot of like weird guest spots, like the World Wrestling Federation, where he appeared as Chucky in a wrestling match.
Yes, that was part of the tie-in for Bride of Chucky.
It was. He had to fight Hornswoggle, the leprechaun.
Yep,
It was funny as hell.
so great. But yeah, so let's get back into this because I feel like this film, when you're talking about it in terms of mental health, like we do here, this film has so much to dissect. Whether you're talking about Karen or Andy or even Chucky to a degree, I think that this film is just woven so brilliantly with all of these deep arcs that can sometimes get lost in the fact that this is a slasher film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to crack a joke about the mom, but now it seems inappropriate. Thanks for that, Josh.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I was going to say the events led the mother to Jesus because she ended up with a giant family in seventh heaven.
Well,
That still blows my mind. Every time I watch this movie, like, because I grew up on Seventh Heaven, and I didn't see this movie until I was well into my adulthood.
Same.
And
she was also
I was like, what?
She was also in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. They brought her back from the past to help take care of the humpback whales in the future.
It's always interesting to see characters from Seventh Heaven and other things besides Jessica Biel. She doesn't count, but like, I'm the same way with Josh. Like, I grew up on Seventh Heaven because my mom loved the show, so we watched it all the time. And I'm like, hey, that's that dude from Seventh Heaven.
Yeah,
what's his face?
The dad was in the original Star Trek movie, and I think he was in some of the episodes too.
Interesting.
And then I think like the second oldest sister was in Saw 2.
Yep, she was.
Can't remember. Beverly Mitchell.
Marsh.
Beverly Mitchell.
Beverly Mitchell. Yeah, that's right.
Did you just recently watch It?
No.
That's where you got the name from.
Yeah, I realized that as soon as I said it. I've read it twice in the last year, so yes.
There you go.
Yeah, there were a few of them from that series that ended up in various horror movies in some capacity or sci-fi.
Yeah.
So,
well, Mark, I'm gonna turn things over to you. I have a lot of questions tonight because I believe, I can't speak for Mike, but I believe you're the only parent on this conversation. Is that correct?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, Karen's, sticking on the subject of the mother is an interesting character to look at because, she couldn't get Andy, the good guy doll that he wanted, couldn't get that one gift. So she already kind of feels like a failure. She is dealing with a potentially toxic workplace environment, and she has to work on his birthday, be away from him. And then, also I think it's interesting to take into consideration of just the fact that she's a single mom, which I feel like in this era of the 80s was something that was still like relatively like a new idea. But as a parent, Mark, how would you say like it processes like disappointment with kids?
I think a lot of kids can be more understanding than people give them credit for. My daughter, there'd be times I'd have to work through her birthday depending on what job I was at, but we always did something for her birthday and she seemed to understand it. So I think a lot of it is more the parents worrying about disappointing the kid than the kid being more understanding that somebody wants to give him credit for.
Okay. I'll take that. I mean, it almost kind of sounds like the way you're putting it. It sounds like it's a case by case basis, because
it can be, because like any person, kids have their own personalities and things like that, and you have some kids that would, it's my day, it's my birthday, nobody's here for it, or we didn't do anything, or I didn't get something like that. But then you have other kids, and a lot of it also depends what the kids may have been through up to that point. Some kids grow up faster than others, but I know with Mina, she's always tended to be somewhat understanding when that kind of stuff happens.
if you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in this show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. I think when you're looking at the early scenes in this movie, particularly as they're opening the presents, you know, there's that disappointment at, you know, Andy, because, you know, here's this large box. It's oh yeah, hey, it's gonna be this good guy doll, this very thing that you covet, and you know, then it comes to find out that it's clothes. And that's such a mom thing to do. Like, I just want to throw that out there. Every year I feel like I ask my mom specifically not to get me clothes, and every year I wind up with clothes to some capacity, even being 30 years old. I don't know if anyone else goes through that, but
I do
every year. It never fails.
I always hear every Christmas morning I hear the line, "I thought you needed some new jeans and a new jacket." Every Christmas. I don't know how many pairs of blue jeans I have that I don't wear.
At a certain point, you almost get to where it's like, I don't need anything. There may be stuff I want, but I don't really need anything. So it's just it turns into another day for some people.
That's how I feel when it comes time to like Christmas, when it was like, you know, what do you need? I'm like, I don't need anything, but I want lots of movies.
Yeah,
and like lots of special editions.
It's funny because like my sister last year, she asked me, she's like, "Hey, what do you want for Christmas?" I said, "Here, just pick a couple movies off my wish list," and it was like steel books from like a bunch of different horror movies. So I got like 3 or 4 of the special edition steel books for movies that I've been wanting forever, and I was like, nice. I'm happy with that. Even if you got it on sale, I don't care. I have them. I own them. They're mine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much what I spend any money that I get now, is like it goes to bills or movies.
Yeah, even with movies, with me though, buying movies has become more rare than it used to be, because I kind of realized I'm buying movies that sit and I may never watch them again. So
Yeah.
it's
I'm
it's
in
only
that weird loop too.
yeah, it's specific movies that I get. Like I really like Midsummer, so I got the A24 release of the director's cut because I like director's cuts of movies. A lot of
Mhm.
times they explain stuff that you miss. But for the most part, yeah, it's just. I mean, like I said, I'm the old fart of the group. I'm going to be 41 in a couple weeks, and my parents and my wife are like, "What do you want for your birthday?" I was like, "I don't food. I'm fat. I like food." So that's, that's kind of how it is. Yeah, it's like let's go to a good meal, or get me a nice piece of beef to put on my grill.
Oh God, yeah. Like a heavenly birthday right there.
Yeah. So I mean, like this year, the only thing actually this year, there's something I'm looking forward to for my birthday, and that's because I've been following the game for years, and it's finally coming to consoles. So there is that one thing this year, but outside of that, it's almost just another day. I'll probably end up at work, and
yeah, it's a rarity, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But kind of sticking with kind of moving from parent to child, the one of the things that really struck me a lot on this rewatch was Mark, you I think you mentioned it greatly when you were talking specifically about how like it does, some kids have their own personality, and I think you, to a degree, you also talked about like how we as adults, we don't really give kids necessarily the attention or like the respect that they deserve, because in the end we just view them as kids and not necessarily miniature adults, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't see them with the almost like rationalizing skills that adults have because they're kids. And yeah, a lot of people really don't. They just don't see kids as their own individual being, more as an extension of the parent, the excited little, overexcited, happy, giddy extension, and they don't want to disappoint it.
I think to a degree, both points are valid. I think there are extensions because to a degree, we behave and we take on traits of our parents well into adulthood. And so one of the things that we've been talking about here for months has been about how environments shape us and how environments specifically have a effect on the way that we view things like mental health, sexual health, political views, religious views, just a number of different things are shaped by the very foundations that we have in our relationships to our parents, to adults, period. But to your other points, talking about how, kids can rationalize, I think you're absolutely right. And I get caught up in this phase as an adult where I don't see children necessarily, they're always just children. So much so that there's actually a line in, I want to say it's the second Child's Play, where he gets burnt alive and his response is, "I hate children." That spoke to me spiritually.
Didn't he get burnt alive in the first one?
He gets burnt alive quite a lot in these movies.
I think he gets burned like 4 times.
It's a running trope in this movie. But one of the things that I bring up child development specifically because this movie showcases sincerely how impressionable children are. And it's never that you should, when you're around children, like I'm always like very cautious about like what I say, what I do, and how I act, because I know that children pick up on those things, and I think we see that here with Andy. Andy, there's a scene in here where Andy ends up actually going to a like a drug or like a whorehouse. And you kind of get to see how impressionable he is. He went there because Chucky told him to go there. Mm-hmm. there's another scene where him and his mom are having a conversation about the aunt's death, and she's like, "Oh yeah, she was a B word. Like she got what was coming to her."
Yeah, they can be little parrots almost. um, a lot of kids end up doing things almost to impress their parents in a lot of cases. And in others, they repeat the behaviors that they've seen. So in the case of Child's Play, he was doing what he was being told, basically, because Chucky was his friend and he couldn't do no wrong, and almost saw him as a pseudo father figure at one point.
I was just about to bring that up. If you guys kind of saw their relationship as kind of like a surrogate, like father-son relationship, because Andy's never really had, like, we don't know where his father is. Like, we don't know what the deal is. Like, you don't get to kind of see that explored until the sequel. But I think for here, he's just kind of eager for that attention, like you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's just he's always with babysitters or at school where his mom's always working. So it was some sort of parental figure that was there all the time.
Yeah, I was kind of related Chucky to like the mom's jerk boyfriend trope, because like everything's fine when mom's around because mom doesn't see the bad that's happening, but when it's just him and the kid, his jerk behavior is rubbing off on the child because he's different when the mom's around. So it's very much that trope, but it's in a different light.
No, I think that's a perfect example and way to kind of sum up their relationship, because it is very much that, and Mark, to your point, like he's always been around his mom or babysitters. And from what we can tell as the audience, those role models have always been female. Mm-hmm. And while I don't want to take away from, one parent families, I think that to a degree and I'm not a scientist, I know nothing about child development, I'm just going to say this. I think that, there are, I'm trying to think about this carefully and respectfully before I say it, is to generally say that like the effect and outcome of having both sexes in your life, whether that is to a degree of like a mentorship or like it doesn't even have to be like a father-mother relationship, but like having at least like both like vantage points around growing up and allowing those both to shape you, I think can like, it's not going to make you as impressionable, I feel like.
So that's actually a tricky topic.
I know it is.
There's been a few studies on that, actually. The impact and influence of parental figures. Because sometimes you may have a dad, but the stepdad is really the dad kind of thing. But there's been a few studies done on it, and they found in a lot of kids, the male influence or lack thereof tends to end up having higher rates of like delinquency almost in various ways for kids that are raised without a father figure. And there's been a few studies done on it.
I think that was ultimately what I was like trying to say, but I haven't, A, I'm not a parent, B, I don't plan on being a parent, and C, I haven't done a whole lot of studies into it. I know that when we were really early into writing our curriculum for getting stuff into the mental health resources into schools, that was one of the things that we were talking about when we were interviewing teachers, is kind of the effect that stuff like that can have on a child growing up in a a single parent home versus a dual parent home. Like, what kind of effect does a mother have on the offspring versus what kind of effect does a father have on the offspring?
Yeah, and you're getting into certain topics that some people tell you are wrong and other people agree with. You start getting into almost gender roles at that point. Mothers tend to have a role where fathers tend to have a different one in a lot of cases. So that kind of thing.
And I mean, even to a degree, like, I think that, Jagger absolutely hit it on the nail when he was, or the head of the nail, when he was talking about how, like, Chucky kind of embraces the jerk boyfriend that, mom brings home, is that that development doesn't necessarily need to come from a direct blood father figure, but father figures can come in multiple different ways, whether that's a teacher, whether that's a mentor, and to kind of even pull from, like, another, like, random reference. You look at the relationship of, like, Boy Meets World and how Corey had not only his father figure but also had Mr. Feeney, and had Corey's dad not been in the picture, he still had Mr. Feeney, then still kind of would have shaped his adolescence and kind of really made him to be the husband that he would grow up to be to Topanga at the end of that series. And I think subsequently, like, we can look to other father figures or mother figures within society that don't necessarily have to fit within the blood norms.
Well, even around that same time period of Boy Meets World, maybe a little bit earlier, you had Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. You had Will Smith going to his uncle's house, and his uncle was Uncle Phil. That was a lawyer, became a judge, and ultimately ends up being to retire, and was a role model. And one of the closing scenes of the movie is him telling Uncle Phil, "Hey, you're going to call me too, like the kids." And as far as Uncle Phil's concerned, he's one of the kids at that point. I actually have a cousin that if you ask her stepfather, she considers him more of a dad than her real dad. Her real dad's in her life and does stuff with her, but the way he treats her and everything, she considers her stepdad more of a dad than her real dad. So it's not out of the ordinary.
It's not. And, like, I have a great relationship with my father and mother both, but I've also had mentors in my life that have had just as much of an impact, if not more, in certain aspects, and have really helped me. And I think that, because, like you said, like Mark, like this, to the study's point, not having that father figure, children are more prone to kind of get into trouble, as the study that you referenced talks about. And I think that we see that here with Andy getting into these dangerous situations and kind of almost being this cry for help, that he relies on Chucky's word almost exclusively, it feels like. And then when he gets called out on it, he, like, wants to have it both ways, and it doesn't really work out for him.
Okay, repeat that again. Somehow I missed something.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, like, he wants the approval of Chucky, but he also wants the approval of others. So he's like of his mom and other people. So he's willing to basically, do whatever Chucky says, but also at the same time, when he gets in trouble for it, he wants to have both worlds, and they're two competing viewpoints.
Yeah, because he throws Chucky under the bus every chance he gets when something happens. If there was a bus rolling through that house, yeah.
It's like the cool best friend thing. Like, you really want to impress your new cool friend, but, like, if they're gonna get you in trouble, he did it. It wasn't me.
No, he was doing what Chucky wanted because like we said earlier, he seemed almost more like a pseudo father figure kind of influence. But with the way he interacted with everybody else, he was a mama's boy. There was no doubt he was a mama's boy. With the way he threw Chucky under the bus in a heartbeat, he was saving his tail by blaming Chucky, even though he ended up in the asylum. So he was a mama's boy, one to please his mama more than anything else.
I'm almost curious though if like Chucky is like the first like adult to like stop and listen to him and like actually treat him like a human being. Because Mark, to your earlier point, like we have this habit as a society to kind of belittle children, and it almost kind of seems like the relationship that they have, like Chucky doesn't necessarily see him as an equal, but he's willing to, at least we are as an audience able to infer that there is this like level of like respect, because he knows that if he respects him, he's going to get what he wants.
You're giving Chucky way too much credit. He's being a manipulative little bastard.
That's what I'm saying,
all
though.
He's doing.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So hear me out, because like what I'm saying is like Chucky is like treating Andy with respect, and it could be the first time that Andy's actually receiving that kind of respect from a male figure.
Is it really respect though?
To Andy, it could be. You know, the children see the world a completely different way than we do as adults. Especially if you're in his situation where your entire like form of like leadership at this point has come from either your mom or your aunt.
I think it's a stretch. I don't think he was showing him any respect or at all. It was take me to the crack house so I can kill my partner. So,
but here's the thing about vantage points is that all right. So for those of you guys that are listening to the audio version of this podcast right now, Jagger, our guest, has a gorgeous landscape behind him, and it is Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers and Pinhead and just all the horror icons. What did you call it again?
I called it Mount Scaremore.
Mount Scaremore. So I can look at this and say, man, this is awesome. And Mark, you can look at this and be like, oh, this is stupid.
What? No, don't even go there. That's awesome. I just don't have a room I can do it in.
I'm just using it as an example, though, because like what I am saying is that we can interpret
like
things.
The lame old fart in the room. I see how it is.
I guess I do have this habit that I'm starting to develop. I'm so sorry. But like you can like interpret like different things in different situations in different things. Tone matters, you know, it's all about perception and how we perceive the actions that are being done from another person.
Well, your perception is going to change as you get older.
True.
The way you see things now at 30, you won't see it the same at 40.
Facts.
I can tell you that from experience. Although that background is still freaking awesome, and I would have it in my house if my wife would let me.
I don't know if I'll feel that way at 40, but
funny enough, my wife's the one that suggested it.
I mean, I'm sitting in the middle of a library right now. If I were to move, if I were to move the camera around, it's 1, 2, 5 bookshelves of books around me right now. Probably enough for another 6th or 7th one. So yeah, I'm sitting in essentially a library.
All right. Let's move on to Chucky. We'll come back to. I have one thing
Chucky
more that I want to.
Chucky was a bastard that ruined a lot of kids' 80s dreams of having a cool My Buddy. That's all I'm going to say.
I mean,
I didn't grow up in the 80s, and I'm really sad I didn't grow up in the 80s because, like, even growing up in the 90s, like, I feel like Chucky ruined dolls for a lot of people. Tim Curry ruined clowns for a lot of people, and I'm just like, man, like, as an adult, I'm just like, yes, I'm here for all of this.
Yeah, Chucky ruined dolls for a lot of people. I'm trying to think, and probably Puppet Master may have assisted with that a little bit.
Puppet Master is a little bit more low key, though.
A little bit more low key, yeah.
Not as much as Chucky did, though.
Fact.
So,
Truth. Yeah.
But you also had the play in Chucky of the voodoo when 70s and 80s, everything was satanic panic.
Yeah.
So it kind of played its little role in Chucky and Child's Play.
I would have pushed back against that just a little bit, because by the time that the satanic panic began to fizzle out, it was like 85, 86, and this came out in 88. So I think you might have had a little bit of outliers, but I think largely that all satanic panic for the large general population had kind of dissipated.
But it was still a fresh topic in the mind, and in the 80s and 70s and even early 90s, movies were taking 3, 4, 5 years to get from start to finish, where you get stuff now that's kind of rushed through in a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah. So you still had that influence on a 1988 movie because of when it probably got started in its processes to begin with. They were still playing off what had happened from the last decade leading up to that point.
That's fair. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. I'm curious though, like, how do you guys, because I didn't really think about it, and this kind of goes back to Mike, a point that you had made earlier about how being a podcaster really changes the way that you perceive movies. Do you guys ever feel like watching this now, that the reveal of kind of like Charles Lee Ray being in the doll comes a little bit too late in the movie, or do you think that it's played in the right way and it's paced accordingly?
I thought it was obvious when I saw it originally.
Yeah, it wasn't one of those things that they tried to hide. It was more so like inserted as a plot device that you knew from the start. And because I mean it was marketed that way. It wasn't one of those things, it's like something's wrong with this doll, but we don't know what. It wasn't like that. It was more so like serial killer is in a doll, what's gonna happen?
Yeah,
Come along for the ride.
It was almost like you said. It was almost marketed that way originally.
Yeah,
that there was no mystery what was going on. You knew what was happening.
I'm not saying that like it's they try to hide the fact, because obviously like the opening scene when he looks at the good guy doll, like you know that like something's about to happen. I'm just saying that like the full animatronic, and maybe this was budgetary reasons, but like the full like animatronic and getting to see Chucky like in actual action, not just like, oh, we're gonna hide it until like the second act of the movie. Like that to me, I think is kind of like one of my only complaints about this movie, is that I would have liked to kind of get to see him more in action and not necessarily live in the shadows for the first half of this movie.
So some of those scenes of Chucky in action, some of it was animatronics, some of it was, I think, a kid or a dwarf in a costume.
It's it was the actor's name is escaping me. the kid who played Andy, it's his actual brother
Okay.
who's in like costume for half of it.
Really?
Yeah, it's his blood.
Amazing.
It's his blood brother in costume, like for like the really quick action scenes, but for like the real close up stuff, it's like I think they said it was like 15 people it took to operate the animatronic.
Yeah, because they had like long boom arms that operated off scene to operate.
And then stuff under
Chucky.
the floor as well.
Yeah, it was actually a lot more advanced for the time period than you would think it was to do the animatronics for Chucky when it was actually a doll and not a kid in a costume.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, you didn't really have anything like that around that time. I mean, 88, it was kind of new stuff, animatronics.
Well, the only real computer heavy movie you had for special effects at that point was Tron. There was little special effects here and there, like with the lightning scene in the opening. You had little lighting, computer effects for lighting effects and like the different Star Wars and things like that. But even that was primarily models and camera tricks.
Yeah.
You didn't have a whole lot of heavy computer generated stuff. Everything had to be practical in some way. Blood effects, monsters, and all that stuff was practical effects almost exclusively. It wasn't until maybe mid 90s that it started to head in the direction of computerized everything, and then they just went overboard with it in 2000.
Yeah. That's kind of one reason why I gravitate towards like 70s and 80s horror, because I love the practical effects. Like Tom Savini is one of like my favorite effects artists.
Oh, he's a legend.
No, he's a legendary. Him and
Stan Winston.
Yeah.
Stan Winston. That's who I was thinking of. I was like Joe Dante's best friend, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
those guys.
There's a funny story about Stan Winston. He was on a plane during the taping of Predator, and Fox was getting ready to cancel it. Van Damme was in the original Predator suit. He was fired because he kept passing out in the suit, and they were going to have a discussion with Fox on what to do, and it was almost canceled. And he happened to be sitting next to James Cameron on the plane, and he was like, "Well, have you thought about giving the alien mandibles?" And he helped him come up with the design for the Predator at that time, which sold it to Fox to finish the movie.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, he talked about that in an interview, that really he gives a lot more credit to James Cameron for the Predator design than most people do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, the practical side of horror is the one thing that I really love. Like a lot of people sit there and look at the plot like, this is so slow. This is so boring and dry. And like you watch Child's Play, it's like it's kind of good that they get to the point, kind of.
There was no twist in it, really.
Right. You weren't sitting there like waiting for what's the twist. It's just like, okay, we know what the twist is. We just need to know when it's coming. And when you sit there and you look at it and you realize, okay, there's a lot of work that's going into this, because you don't have like RC animatronics at this point. These are like multiple people trying to do all these movements in sync, multiple cuts, operating this doll, plus voice acting going over top of it. It's like, it's a lot of work going into these scenes, and it's impressive.
Yeah. I sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. I mean, some of the stuff that they were doing was somewhat, if you really look into it, was kind of pioneered by some of Disney's stuff and Jim Henson. A lot of the stuff he was doing, because you had Labyrinth, you had Dark Crystal, and things like that. So they took a lot of the things they learned from that, as well as some of the George Lucas productions of the different Star Wars up until that point. You should hear about how they did the original Jabba the Hutt. That was 6 people in a giant costume.
Just moving different parts with levers and wheels and things.
Yeah. And they took everything they learned from basically that kind of stuff, and you ended up with Chucky, almost a believable live doll.
Yeah.
Oh, the animatronics for Chucky look absolutely incredible, even by today's standards. That's kind of one of the things that I'm really glad that as a franchise that they've been able to keep and stick with. That's one of my only fears with like this like supposed like either threequel or like reboot that they're talking about for Gremlins. Gremlins is like a perfect movie, and I don't think it would
makes it
wouldn't be as effective if you took the animatronics out of it. Like movies like that and like even to bring it back to our pilot episode for Ghoulies, like the animatronics of that era that you see in those movies and here in Child's Play, like that is what makes them who they are. And whether or not you view it as a product of their time or, you know, even just something that you know, just is outdated or whatever you want to say, like it gives this film so much charm. And I don't even, like I said, even looking at it by today's standards, like it's just absolutely incredible how timeless this still ends up being, because you can go back and look at, like, I just watched Lord of Illusions for the first time this past weekend, and
that's a good movie.
Great movie. There's a couple scenes with like CGI, and I'm like, this is 1995, and this looks like outdated all get out, and this predates that movie by almost 10 years, and it still looks great.
Well, talking about special effects, one of the ones you can look at is the original not the original 1980 thing was actually a remake. It was all traditional effects, and how awesome that movie is. And then, granted, a lot of people didn't like the story, but the prequel they did 6-7 years ago wasn't the same, because the studio, the studio pushed for that. The director, I saw an interview with the director, he wanted the traditional effects again, and the studio basically said, no, you're going to do it this way so we can make them more angry and fast and all this other stuff. And it really took away from the movie as a whole, because they went with the CG monsters as opposed to the traditional effects they used in 1980.
Yeah, I've always said that, like, practical effects kind of give movies a soul. Like a lot of people say nowadays, like horror feels very soulless. It doesn't feel like an art form as much anymore, especially when it comes to like monster movies, like creature features. And I'm like, that's because it's all moved to computers. And it's like, I can sit behind a computer for 8 hours and type out some code and just power through it and not feel anything. But I mean, if I'm sitting there with a live cast of a model, sculpting a monster by hand, doing a full live cast, building these effects from scratch and like putting them into effect, that's a craft. That's craftsmanship. That's hard work. That's grit. And it gives the movie that something extra. Yeah, sometimes they come out looking really cheesy, but like that's your hard work on screen, not so much just, I typed out 4 million lines of code and voila, I pumped out a thing. Whoop-de-doo.
I mean, you could
look at the Evil Dead remake. It was all traditional effects, except for like 1 or 2 small scenes.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
Wonderful.
It's everything a remake should be of a movie.
Yes, I agree.
They in no way tried to redo the original. They took the original and went their own direction for it, and they kind of realized there was no way they were going to cast a new Ash, and they didn't even try. They did what they wanted the original to be to begin with, and they kept it traditional. I think they used something like 10,000 gallons of fake blood in that movie.
Yeah.
It was something ridiculous.
And they did the same. They did a similar thing when the Muschietis did the It Chapter 2. They did a combination of CGI and practical effects, like the bathroom stall scene in Chapter 2. That's actually
which
Jessica Chastain. It Chapter 2.
Oh yeah,
the remake. That's actually Jessica Chastain in a bathroom stall being drowned in blood or fake blood, and the combination of the two, you can tell when they're using real and when they're using CGI effects, and you can tell like the different work that goes into it, because each scene it just has a different feel to it.
It almost loses its impact and its dramatic play to what's going on. You look at it and it's a tub full of blood or whatever, as opposed to you look at it, you could tell, oh, that's computerized liquid.
Yeah.
I would even say too, like to your point, Mark, that like sometimes if like CGI is like really bad, because Mike, like what you were just talking about with like, you know, I can spend hours like sculpting this one thing, and you know, I would appreciate that more because like you can spend the same amount of time and at a computer typing in code and it can look terrible. But the thing about the practical effects is that they might look bad, but it'll age gracefully. Whereas that CGI is always going to be a product of its time. And Mark, to your point, CGI can really if a CGI is distracting and terrible enough, it can actually distract a viewer, or at least it can distract me from like the actual story, and it's like less impactful in the long run.
But then you have instances where the bad special effects or bad computer ends up making the movie awesome. Like we saw a few years back, we went to one of the Psychoramas when it was a 3-day event as opposed to an overnight. And one of the first movies they showed was Dead Ant. And the director was there. And he was joking about the special effects computer generated ants being like way out of proportion and just ridiculous, and it was because of miscommunication.
That sounds like it's on purpose though.
He was saying it was because the budget, they ended up using like a Russian special effects company, and they ended up with just giant ants that just look completely ridiculous. And you watch the movie and it's over the top and fantastic because it's bad special effects just play into the whole movie and the way it is. So sometimes it actually helps. It ends up making a classic. Like The Room is a horrible movie, but it's a classic because of how bad it is.
Yep.
It's a great movie. Get it right.
Point proven. Next case, Your Honor.
So the last thing I feel like deserving of attention, and also perhaps kind of points into why we exist as a nonprofit. So this film, like when Chucky is kind of like, Andy's kind of like can't really blame Chucky anymore. They do something very illegal, and they have a police officer talk to Andy without a parent present, and a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist, or at least we're led to believe he is one, was like watching via a two-way mirror. And it's because of this like analyst that basically like Andy gets thrown into like a child prison. And I feel like
put into like a psych ward, I think.
Yeah, but like what psych ward has that way, like has like bars that desperate for like a 6-year-old? Like how much of a danger is he really?
Yeah.
Because to me, like I just kind of like took that as like are the kind of like the faults in our own mental health system, where we have this like this tendency not necessarily to listen, but to find out how we can like just put the problem on pause or medicate it instead of actually getting to the root of it.
I think that comes in with the need for the system to quote unquote fix us, because there's not really in back in the 80s and 90s, everyone was like, okay, there's a problem, we can fix it. Nowadays, we've grown more into the mentality of there's a problem, how do we handle it? There's no fixing it. How do we deal with our problems? How do we kind of move forward with our problems? And I think that's illustrated really well in Child's Play. It's like the 80s mental health system is like, okay, he's a problem, lock it up. Let's do that.
I would even argue to an extent that for as much progress we are making to how we fix the issue, like what you're talking about, like we still have practices that are being done that haven't actually moved on past the 80s or the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get this stigma of mental health that is still very much present and is still very much alive in our society. And that's why I think that, something like us having conversations about it here, like on Twitch, or if you're listening to this after the initial broadcast, like you're listening to it on Spotify or Amazon or Google or Apple Podcasts, like these conversations need to have place, because honestly, like depression makes you just feel like you're alone and that you don't have any value or worth, or that no one will understand you. And we need to get to a point in society where the reason that I think a lot of us don't want to even admit that we have a problem that needs to be asked, how do we solve it? Or is because we're afraid of, not being heard, or if we are heard, we are medicated to not be heard anymore.
Well, it's kind of two reactions. You tell somebody you have an issue or condition, it's you're crazy, or they throw pills at you like Tic Tacs. And even common medicines like that, they just throw medicine at you for everything, no matter what it is. So that's kind of the two reactions: is you're either nuts or here, pop some pills.
It's either that or a lot of people still surprisingly tend to belittle mental health a lot. It's like, that's not that big a deal. Everyone's sad. Get over it. You hear that a lot still.
Yeah. There's a lot of discrediting to people's issues and condition.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because you don't deal with it, you may think that it's not a real thing, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's the thing about about depression, is that depression looks different for everyone. Like someone could be like legitimately depressed that their sports team didn't win the Super Bowl. Like for some people, that could be the very thing that is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they either commit themselves, harm themselves, turn to drugs, just a number of other things. Whereas someone else could be like, oh man, like that's really upsetting to me, but I'm going to talk about it in therapy. And Mark, it's that exact reaction that you're talking about, is like we are going to act one of two ways. And in some ways, like it can feel really extreme, like what you're saying, Mike, about how it's, we downplay it so much, and we're at this point where I think a lot of us, it's uncomfortable. Like who in the world truly likes to talk about depression? Who likes to talk about suicide or addiction? When you go on to social media, you're not hearing people talk about the worst parts about themselves, because they want to tell everyone, oh, look at this cool car that I just invested in, or here's my thoughts on this latest James Bond movie, or whatever the source is, because you want to personify yourself to be the best parts of yourself and not the vulnerable parts.
Yeah, no one likes to put themselves out there as the vulnerable one. You always want to put yourself out there as like I've got myself together. I'm good. Everything's okay. And
yeah,
it's very hard to do.
The more you project that, the more people have confidence in you and your abilities to do things as well. It's why you end up, actually, they found that one of the highest percentages of, I think it was psychopaths, end up being in like CEO positions, because the job almost requires that level of lack of empathy.
Well, that was the whole reason we got American Psycho.
Yeah, and from someone that has worked in customer service and been at that level of influence, yes, can speak from experience, can confirm. It's not a good. But I just want to encourage anyone that is either watching this or listening to this, like, if you need any help at all, we've been throwing these resources out all throughout the entire chat. Like, you're not alone. And while the system might not necessarily be perfect, there are resources out there available to you. So please consider the resources and know that you're not alone. But gents, I think that's going to wrap it up for us talking about Child's Play. Mike, Mr. Jagger, where can people find the Box Network one more time?
You can find the Box Network on Twitch at _Box Network. We are also on all socials at the Box Network with no O and no E's on Instagram and Twitter.
Mark, where can people follow your painting adventures?
Yeah, I paint miniatures because I'm a nerd and it's fun, and I'm on. I show up as Titanium Juggernaut Painting on Instagram, and occasionally in a painter's Twitch as Immortal Chaos. So yeah.
Facts, yeah.
Yeah.
You guys can also you guys can find me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and occasionally I do things on TikTok at Gentleman Ghostface. But you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, wherever you get your podcasts from. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and here on Twitch, as well as going to victimsandvillains.net will get you access to not only all of those socials, more podcasts like this, movie reviews, but most importantly, our mental health resource library. And you guys can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/victimsandvillains, which is as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into conventions and film festivals, and hopefully soon after school programs. But thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight, and we'll be back this weekend talking about Halloween Kills. So until next time, remember that the longer that you stare at the abyss stares back.